This came at a point where there were a lot of discussions about artistic practices that are happening between Lebanon and Israel, and some more context. The communication between Lebanese and Israeli citizens, artists, whatever, is completely prohibited, mostly from the Arab side, but also it works both ways. What I wanted to do, part of my research is generative fiction, and as Daniel was saying, it's works of writing that extend themselves outside of the book. So the important part is not creating a document that is just read, but creating a document as a form of blueprint or architecture for some scenario. And a big topic in the Arab world is called Tat'beeh. Tat'beeh in Arabic translates to normalization or naturalization. And I felt it was sort of fitting for this context to deal with it. And instead of naturalization, or to make natural the relationship between these two countries, is prohibited by law. So technically speaking, to make the situation a natural situation, whatever that natural meant, is something that is not allowed. The solution would be either this party wins or that party wins, or they need to learn to coexist without really liking it. What I did with this is write a novel in a language that doesn't exist yet. It's a speculative language of Arabic and Hebrew, where at some point in time they realized that they need to sort of collapse between each other. And the logic of this language is that the Arabic for Arabic is Arabi, and the Arabic for Hebrew is Abri. And the difference between these two words is just one letter, which is a B. One is before the R, one is after the R. So these people decided that fuck the letter B, we're going to remove it from our alphabet. So the word becomes Uri, means nudity. And this new language is a language that is naked from the letter B. And when they removed that letter, the new language that you will see here, which is unlegible unless you're from that future. And in the margin you have a commentary in English that tells you what the story is about. So it's also a little jerk at this idea of when things happen around the world and we read them in English, something happens. And these sort of starting points are things that I'm developing further with this idea of generative fiction in my research. So I would like you to read this maybe for 20, 30 minutes, and then we can talk about it. Time passed, yet they remained now. In this story, the men were never hungry. They may have eaten between the lines, or may have feasted on the letter B as they omitted it when they spoke to each other, and when they spoke to the river, and when they spoke to the trees. In this story, the men smiled to each other, but there's no mention of a conversation. There is no dialect, but it is assumed that they must have said something to one another. Outside of their intimacy or how their faces are described, we do not know how a letter may have tasted like. We can imagine how smiles would substitute speech, and if we are to accept their feeling that what was binding them was beyond what they would rationally comprehend, we too will not question it. They say the crashing waves, as they eject up into the sky, reflect memories not meant to resurface, birthing holograms of things that must not be seen. There was no boundary for this world, and the waves crashed on nothing. They stared at the men, and the men stared back. Mute, they lifted them off the ground and brought them back muter. Even from these temporary elevations into the air, with every climaxing wave, they saw nothing, so they imagined things. Their imaginations mixed with salt of the new sea as they dived deeper into a world of their own making. There is no clear reference in this story that the world was theirs, but the island, the river, and the sea were modeled after the wrinkles on their cheeks. Time passed, and they remained now. They smiled, continuously thinking, feeling, and observing themselves while afloat and while submerged in their sea. The men recorded their wisdom in the most beautiful shells they could find and threw them back. The tide took these shells to shores behind the horizon and waited for people to pick them up. The roaring sounds in the shells, when put close to one's ears, were called the wisdoms of the sea. They sounded like the hiss of the wind over the open waters. These wisdoms were not made for the mind. The sounds told the heart how it needed to beat, and it was customary to put them back after one's questions were answered. The wisdom of the sea was for everyone to hear. It is said that the wisdoms of the sea were the first encounters with the language in which the story speaks. It is said that the land with no name will not rise again until it is the language by which we speak. Until then, everything was water, and the men floated, their faces either facing the sky or facing the earth, continuously taking in beyond what they can breathe. In the story, two men seem to be free.